I'm Dr. Rod Berger. Sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and explore some of today's most pressing educational issues through the experienced eyes of leading education personalities. Welcome to Coffeed. Well, gentlemen, it's so nice to be reconvening. You know, earlier in this year, we got a chance to sit down and discuss so many different topics around game-based learning and the ways in which it's interfacing with the corporate world, higher education, K-12, and off-air and in continued conversations, we thought that there was more to be said. And so it's just nice to be back with the three of you. And let's start with this. Let's talk a little bit about the difficulties that we're seeing universities having, that they're having with implementation of new technology, such as GBL, game-based learning, and where we are with that. Are we making any strides, and what can we do to actually enhance these conversations so that we're not stuck in the Stone Age, which a lot of people think higher education can be in at times? Andre, do you want to share your initial thoughts?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Rod. I'm glad to be here again. So what I'm seeing at the universities, there's a great interest in faculty utilizing game-based learning. They just don't know where to go. How to find out about it. There isn't a publisher that's the clearinghouse that can vet the good from the bad, because there's thousands of products out there of varying different qualities, and we don't have a rating system of what actually works. And it's kind of like a book, because game-based learning is another tool. While we have efficacy studies going on, they're proving certain aspects. Ultimately, every tool also relies on the teacher and how the teacher uses that tool. The best tool in the wrong hand can do damage. A mediocre tool in great hands can do wonders. And so the first thing is really helping faculty understand how they can incorporate it, making it easy for them. And quite a few faculty are afraid that the technology may be beyond them. They don't necessarily play games, and they don't want to look, excuse my language, foolish in front or stupid in front of their students. And so they're afraid, and we need to help them overcome that barrier, kind of like back in the 80s when computers first started coming around. And teachers, faculty were worried about, I don't know how to use this. I'd rather not, because I don't want to look like an idiot in front of my students that may actually be more skilled in utilizing this technology.
Hey, you mentioned there about rating systems. Jim, what is your perception on that? I mean, it seems that, obviously the three of you are scholars in this space, and people are looking to, in their own areas of expertise and education, for your thoughts and ways to integrate in game-based learning. Whose responsibility is to build a rating system that can hopefully turn the tide, so that, to Andre's point, and being very respectful, that these professionals don't feel that they are out of place, a fish out of water in the very place that they've been anchored in for so many years in their profession?
Well, something that I think that we're seeing is, in comparison to the entertainment game industry, is the rating system is kind of a grassroots effect among faculty. I think that most people would agree that, so far anyway, the way that faculty come across games that they want to use in the classroom is by recommendation from other faculty. So if it's a strong game, faculty are pretty quick to recommend it to each other, especially across conferences, and the opposite is also true. So I think that it's more of a grassroots kind of a rating system right now than it would be something more systemic like you see in entertainment games.
Is that something, though, that we need, though? I mean, isn't it fair to say that at some point we kind of go from being organic to, it's sort of like saying, well, we have a bit of a business plan here. Now we actually need to sit down and put pen to paper.
Well, the disparity in quality is definitely something that, needs to be addressed. So I think that a rating system and some kind of overarching organization that was responsible for that could really help adoption.
Karl, I know that you've been developing so many different courses with Linda and doing things online and helping to build it through the corporate side of it, the value of game-based learning. Are there lessons that you think that we could all be learning that we could apply to higher education and from an adoption perspective?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that we can do. I think one is it's very interesting. I'm reading about the future of gaming. They said, Steam is going to start fracturing. So there's so many games on Steam, it's hard to find kind of the game that you want. And I think one of those fractures should be something related to games for higher education with a rating system and with some information about what objectives of the course are being met from those particular games. So I think that's really kind of something that could happen. I'd love to, this will never happen, but I would love to see an accrediting body start looking at and assigning ratings to game-based learning. Again, that will never happen, but that's really where accrediting bodies should be instead of
Why won't it happen?
Because I find that accrediting bodies tend to be just rubber stamping organizations, and there's been a lot of issues with accreditation and how accreditations are working, and I don't know that they have the skill set to look at and evaluate these games. So I think it's going to have to be a third-party organization, kind of like I think a lot of like an FDA, but for game-based learning, right? Or some third-party vitamin companies now have this professional association. Maybe it's the Software Games Association. Maybe they could have a branch that could help to go ahead and rate these games. We're working, Andre, Jim, and I have had conversations about creating at least a rubric or some type of measurement tool to find out, is this a quality game, even on the most basics. And to go back to a little bit what Andre is saying, I've been working with some faculty here and found them to be surprisingly open to the concept of game-based learning, but they have never had that experience before. They didn't have it when they were in school. They didn't have it in any teacher or faculty professional development. So there needs to be, I think, hand in hand, a rating system and an instructional system by some kind of standards body to kind of move the whole concept forward. Now, lacking that, because we don't really have that for textbooks, right? So lacking that, I think to Jim's remark, good games will rise to the top. Faculty will find them from other faculty at conferences, and there's not a better ambassador than a faculty member who has had success with her students using game-based learning.
How much of this is marketing? How much of this is political? When we think about sort of what we're dealing with, I mean, we're dealing with an educational system that is built on tradition, bricks and mortar, and that's why I hear from all of you this, we'd love to be doing it, we're thinking about it, but sort of who should be taking up the torch? And do we almost have to have sort of an operative approach? Do we need to be thinking very strategically about how to position games so that those that are very traditional are buying into it and that there's data behind it? I mean, I saw, Karl, that you had put up on Twitter, the data around the funding and the forecast around it. I mean, it's incredible, the growth of game-based learning just from a funding perspective. So somebody's paying attention, right? So people are writing checks, and that would say to me that there's potentially an opportunity. Does that land the same for you guys, or am I off?
So I wanted to go back kind of on this tradition concept, one topic back a little bit, that Karl had a great point about accreditation. So ponder this for a moment. At DeVry University, we have a course that's taught entirely in a game. So this is the final capstone course in a bachelor's degree program in criminal justice, and the students earn their bachelor's degree by solving a cold case and playing as a detective. So if you're on the accreditation team and you come to DeVry University and you see this, what do you do with this? What do you make of this in terms of the tradition versus us implementing in the classroom?
No, that's a great point. Andre, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I've been trying to find a solution to the whole accreditation and ratings. The challenge with that is, as we're seeing, for example, one of our games, Variant, it's been in the classroom for testing and efficacy studies for a year and a half now. We're not done yet. So imagine an FDA kind of approach. I have a finished game, because you really need to finish a game before you can test it. I have a finished game. I submit it to the ratings body. 2 or 3 years later, I actually get the results back, because it takes that long to really do proper, rigorous scientific research on the efficacy. Well, 2 or 3 years later in the technology world, things are really moved on. I'm kind of out of date now and, missed the boat. Plus, we're not set up currently in a way where the you talked about capital here a minute ago, whereas a capital is coming in and saying, yes, we're going to invest in this business and we're going to wait 3 years till a game is approved after spending millions to make the game to then potentially see some returns. Because as the games come out there, yes, grassroots effort by teachers telling other teachers about it, obviously that's the best advertising you get, but it's incredibly slow. Really, really slow. There isn't probably a slower way of getting products out there in education. And so you're now looking also at a tail end of years before you even recoup your money. So what do you say to an investor? Yeah, give me a few $1 million. 10 years from now, we're going to be profitable and able to pay you back. I don't think the investment will flow in that way. So that's why we see a lot of games out there that have no research behind it, that are having, 21st century skills we're teaching them. And how do you prove that? Well, just trust us. We know. Because we've spoken to, we have advisors on our board or something. And so you're getting into these, really what I call gray areas, which then a teacher hears it and they may have a great marketing team behind them, uses it, like, wow, this didn't really work. This is crap. And now it gives everybody a bad taste because we still haven't changed the language. We're still talking about games as everything versus very specific. We don't say, oh, so-and-so has written a bad book. Well, all books are bad. No, it's this one book that's bad.
I'm glad you brought up the book component, and we may have talked about this in the panel when we were all together earlier this year, but it speaks to me of the business model. Is there not, if we're thinking about it, because you make a great point, Andre, that it's very hard, the argument to a prospective investor or investor group that, look, invest now and in 10 years we hope you're going to get your return. Do we need to be marrying the game-based learning community and the technical savvy, right, and all of this innovation with the publishing world, with an entity or a vertical that can afford, I don't want to call it a loss leader, but they can afford to assume the cost, understanding that it takes them into the next generation, into the next millennial, to say, well, we understand we went from paper now to a visual means of our textbooks, and if we don't continue to iterate through that, we will die in the vine. Wait a minute, games are engaging, they're research-based, we have all of this coming. Should we not invest and partner with companies like Triceum and do something so that we can allow Triceum to grow and flourish and understand that it is a longer adoption timeline? Is that not a fair argument?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it actually has been proven that it works. Broderband, the original publishers of Oregon Trail, they understood this and that's how they've operated. And then unfortunately they were bought out by another company and so on. And it kind of went away. And if you look at Oregon Trail, according to the data that I've seen, sold 65 million copies. 65 million copies of a game-based learning product, but not in a single year, over the span of 40 years. So they made a lot of money. But it takes really somebody with vision and deep pockets, frankly, to invest in that isn't going to look, well, what's my next quarter return? We didn't quite make this. It takes years in this space. And these days, I don't know that people have the patience anymore to really invest in long-term years and saying, yes, it's ultimately it will prevail.
Well, and to your point about not investing in long-term, I mean, they're not going to build this from scratch, right? We're not going to see a publisher all of a sudden build out a gaming department and try to recruit the likes of the three of you. It doesn't make a lot more business sense to say, no, wait a minute, there are these different entities. We ought to partner together because it's much more cost effective and it allows the thought leaders and innovators like yourself to be that which is important in selling what we're actually talking about here.
Yes, I think, I totally agree with you.
Karl, what are your impressions of that?
I agree as well. I think at some point the big publishers are going to start to look around and say, you know what, we need to do some acquisitions. And I think that's probably a future wave. We still have to start it's the chicken or egg. As Andre talks about, we need to get a little bit of cash flow for them to say, hey, this is something that we think makes a lot of sense. But as there's more and more pressure, I think, on the publishers to think digitally and think differently, they're going to start to say, well, wait a minute. And I think ironically, I think one of the things that's going to change that is this backlash against testing. So a lot of those publishers make a fair amount of money on testing.
You're being kind.
I am being kind, yes. And I'd love to have a piece of that fair amount of money. But I really believe that when there's going to be some political pressures on that and some backlash on that, then there's going to be a looking for another channel or vehicle. And game-based learning, as Andrea said and as Jim has said, it has proven itself, and so it does work. And so they're going to start to do that because they have the distribution channels, they have the marketing channels, they have the representatives on campus. I mean, they have all of that. So it's just a matter of them deciding to pivot in that direction. And I can't believe that's not going to happen in the future. I just don't know when. And I think it's going to be a combination of some political forces, some economic forces, and some pressure in terms of people saying, hey, this is really fun, this is really good, let's go ahead and do that. I mean, Google Games has invested an awful lot of money in the educational aspect of Google Games. So if someone like Google's looking at it, it's going to be important, and it's going to turn some heads. So I really think it's kind of I think it's going to be a hockey stick, right? It's going to be slow. Then I think it's really going to accelerate.
Jim, do you see that your work would serve as a conduit? I mean, working within a university system in that regard and having a department that's doing that, I mean, can that help to bridge the conversation between sort of corporate and entity to the educational system?
I think there's some things that we're learning the hard way, the expensive way, that we can help share with the more traditional channels that can help them be more effective. Some of the publishers have already taken a shot. McGraw-Hill has, Elsevier has. One of the things that they saw that made it difficult for them is they didn't treat games like a product with a product life cycle that you have to manage. They're used to selling books. So once you get a book adopted, the book's adopted. There's not really going to be pushback down the road about that book. But as we all know, a game has a long, long life cycle. By the third major iteration, you're really starting to circle the kill in terms of the quality of the product. And at every university and college, leadership changes 2, 3, 4 years. And each time that leadership turns over, you have to resell the game. You can't just get the game adopted and assume everyone's going to keep it in the classroom, because they don't. So I think that, a lot of the friction that McGraw-Hill and Elsevier saw in their early attempts were as a result of them treating it like a text still, even though they had gotten it, into the pipeline. And I think that those of us that are doing this, directly, the more that we can communicate with them and share our experiences, the faster that they can become more profitable and have it be less risky.
Andre, speak about that turnover. Does that impact research? I mean, is there fear? I mean, there's one element where, Jim's talking about, look, if leadership is turning over, we have to continue to sell the game as a product, as an opportunity. How does that impact, or what kinds of thoughts do you have regarding research that's either going to stall or continue?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. It all depends on how you approach it. For example, at Triceum, for us, the research comes first. Why we're actually building the games. We don't release a game that isn't backed by rigorous research. So, and we have to deal with that. And sometimes it takes longer to actually get the game done because research is stalled. A faculty that was going to use it in his classroom is now not. And now you're waiting a whole semester. Maybe it was spring semester. Now you have to wait for the fall. I mean, your time spans are pretty significant. Right? If you're jumping between 2 semesters, I mean, that has an impact on your bottom line. Okay, I can't release a game for the fall, maybe for the spring, because my research isn't completed. So those are the kind of things you have to deal with, and you have to be able to weather through in this space, because if you don't, you're going to be out of business very fast. Or, for big corporations, they go, well, we didn't make this quarterly results. Never mind that there's a big, long tail, as, products like Oregon Trail, Carmen San Diego has proven, and you have to strike the right balance. Now, we are lucky with our partnership with the university at Texas A&M and at Florida State, where we can do the research as we're building the games. Other companies may not be as lucky. They have to build the game, then they have to find a university, get the research done. And that's why we see, unfortunately, many products where it's years before they even start the research on efficacy, but they're already out in the market.
Are there things that we can be doing if we look at it? I mean, we're talking about sort of adult populations or older student populations. Are there things that we can be doing even K-8 to start to infuse the system with the thought process so that it just becomes a regular part of our understanding of education, that games are here, that's just what we do, that my young children will be experiencing that, and it's not just the pure entertainment side of it, but it's the combination, right? It's the research that's backed. We know there's a group, I know out of Canada, Answerables, that's, an LMS blended with gamification and game-based learning principles for the K-8. And that's really interesting to me because we now are merging, right? We're looking at the ways in which both a teacher and a student going through K-8 would experience not only the technology, but also an environment where they can engage in a very different manner. Should we be looking at K-8 as a way to start to turn the tide from the marketing, the messaging, just the relevancy that we're here to stay in that regard as an industry?
I think in some ways the K-8 industry is a little bit easier because you kind of expect kids to learn from games and you kind of have games in there. And then when you get to college, it's time to get serious. And so we're not going to, have games and stuff. So I think that's part of the issue. I think I think a leverage point is teacher preparation. So if we could get into teacher preparation programs and help them understand how to integrate games into classroom, expose them to criteria for games, research-based, make sure that it's got a certain amount of efficacy, understanding the scaffolding that needs to go around the game in order to make it work, making the teacher comfortable with it. I think that's a really good leverage point. And then those teachers and those programs will then start to leverage more and more games. I think it's, if we look at the ecosystem, it's a huge ecosystem, schools and education, and each part of the ecosystem, we have to try as influencers as much as we can to start influencing all of those to kind of converge around the efficacy of game-based learning. So I think definitely K-12, I think it's a little bit easier sell. When I work with teachers and I say, okay, let's make a game, they've got the content right away and they're ready to go. When I work with corporate professionals, sometimes it's really difficult to get them to make that kind of jump. So the teachers can get it and they can make that jump, I think, a little bit easier. Teacher prep and professors, I think, a little bit harder, a little bit more nudging, but I think that can be done. And then I think there needs to be some kind of outside body to kind of look at it. And I think there needs to be some interest from a publisher. And I'd love to see like an indie Steam kind of thing. There is a Serious Games Group, and they've got quite a foothold, but they haven't coalesced around policies, procedures, standards, accreditations, those type of things that typically come with a professional organization. And if they decide to grow in that, or another group decides to grow in that direction, I think that will help the ecosystem kind of do it. To Andre's point, I think it'll eventually catch on, but are we going to be alive for eventually, right? So we want, so what we're trying to do, I think all three of us and yourself included, all four of us are trying to accelerate that process. And really what we need to do is and what we're trying to do is partner with others so that they can multiply our acceleration elements. And I think those kind of elements will come together. But I think K-12, I'm finding to be a lot more open to it than the college professors, which, if you think about it, I'm just going to take a quick segue. You can become a college professor with no instruction at all in how to teach.
A little secret that not everybody knows, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, it blew my mind when what do you mean these people don't have to know about teaching? No, if you're really good in history, you can teach history. It doesn't matter if you can talk or not, but you can teach history. So So,
I'm really good at watching basketball. That doesn't mean I play for an NBA team, you know?
exactly. Yeah, it's crazy. It makes no sense. But because yeah. I mean, the skills you need to do research are not the same skills you need to convey knowledge. Two different skill sets. But anyway, so the idea then that these folks in colleges are just going to understand the pedagogy of games and how they work, or the andragogy if we go with adult learners, is not something that is an everyday occurrence. So the uphill battle is really there. And I think these outside organizations, um, there's a company called Skillsoft, there's LinkedIn Learning, there's a bunch of places that have all these like talking head video courses. And at some point, I think they're going to look around and say, you know what, we need a little bit more interactivity. How do we do that? And they're going to start to look to games as well. So I think, I talked about it before. I think there's going to be some trigger point, because all the tinder's there, right? We just need kind of the spark. And at some point they'll spark, and whoever does that is going to be really successful, I think.
Let's examine the travel that you guys partake in and the conferences that you go to. Is it fair, to your point, when you're talking about serious games, Karl, and sort of the lack of organization around maybe the business of it, the policy, when we're talking about accreditation, are you seeing that the people that are the leading voices, and I use that term loosely when you're going to these conferences, are people that understand the broader scope beyond just the pure innovation? Because I think that, that's where things separate them. You have the people that are the absolute innovators, and then you have another layer that not only understand that, but their real skill is understanding the way in which that industry can fit with others and partner and look at accreditation and policy. Like, are we seeing a growth in that area from the gaming side of it when we're talking about education, that the people that are keynoting, the people that are sort of thought of as the leaders in the space can conceptualize all of those different complex components together?
Well, in my experience, we need that extra layer. Like, all the innovators are out there talking about what they're doing and how effective it is and all that kind of stuff. And we don't have that layer of policy makers, or we don't seem to have that layer of people who want to kind of put that structure in place to make that happen. And I think part of it is because there's a lot of forces that the existing structure works really well. And there are a lot of benefits for them to keep that structure in place. And so doesn't seem to be that
short-term thinking, isn't it?
I think it's very short-term thinking, and ultimately it hurts the student, right? So now we have this whole industrial educational complex that is very comfortable in kind of what they're doing, changing around the edges because they have to, but fundamentally they're not making those policy changes there. There doesn't seem to be, in my experience, enough of those advocates to get to that level. But I'd be really interested to hear what Jim and Andre have to say about that.
Andre?
Well, I know.
Oh, Jim, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jim.
Thanks, Andre. I was just going to say that from my experience, even this far into the process, we're still all preaching to the choir. So when you go to a conference, it's early adopters talking to early adopters. So 2 years ago, we were talking about, these advances in game-based learning. And, now we're talking about VR. And next year, we're going to talk about AI. But it's still all of us early adopters talking to early adopters. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, when you go to, your academic council, or you're talking to administrators and you're talking about some of these advances that are being made, it is so far from their actual firsthand experience that they hear the terms and they're familiar with them, but they have no concept of really what the advances and benefits are actually about. So I think that in being able to reach back out of the early adopter group and into more of a traditional late adopters, in that bell curve, I think that's really what we're going to have to do if we're going to be able to develop a critical mass.
Interesting. So my perspective is slightly different on this. So I have to say, what I've seen is that game-based learning is no longer sexy. So really the big names, they're now talking about VR. They're now talking about AI. They haven't really they used to talk about game-based learning. They haven't really stuck it out. There's some of us that are in it. We're building games. We're trying to get them in the classroom. We're making the next one and so on, trying to advance the conversation, trying to advance the frameworks, the understanding, going deeper, not just the high-level understanding, but what is mechanics, game mechanics, different mechanics, how do they map to different learning objectives and so on. I mean, really starting, now we can tackle some of those subjects. There's very few people left because it takes a lot to make a game. It takes even more to get a game adopted by enough students at any scale, if that's K through 8 or if it's at higher education. And then it takes even more to now do research and make modifications and so on. That's a very, very long road. It's a lot of hard work. And I'm seeing, frankly, a lot of people that used to talk about it, they're not making games. They're not talking about other things. They're not implementing. They're not doing the work that's really actually needed. They're not the policymakers say, okay, let's really sit down and figure this out. How can we advance this? To me, games is just another medium, just like books, just like television and radio, and the conversation, needs to change. Okay, what type of game are we using and why are we using it? So at A&M, for example, we're now for the first time implemented, it started 2 weeks ago, the first game-based course where students earn college credit for playing a video game. So that's brand new, and the upper administration, from the president onward down to the faculty that are running the course, they are really excited, they're engaged, and they're putting on free courses in the spring. So it's really taking off because we're seeing, I don't know, recently I had this conversation, MOOCs. MOOCs are kind of, everybody's really suffering, oh, MOOCs. But we've seen they're not necessarily as effective as everybody was hoping. Students are dropping out. The engagement is just not there. And having videos with talking heads, I don't know how effective that is of a means of education. I mean, I don't know that many faculty that use videos with talking heads every day in the classroom. So it may be good for marketing efforts or short term, but really for deep formative learning, it's as good as a sage on the stage. Okay, well, now we have a video on the stage. What has changed? Really?
You made a comment there earlier. You talked about games not being sexy anymore, and then it's really going to, you said, jumping to VR and AI. Is there a danger in cannibalizing the entire thing if we can't for a moment slow down? It's like I picture my 5-year-old running around being all boy, and I have to say to him, slow down, slow down. Do we kind of need to say, slow down? Yeah, VR, AI, great. But if we really want a foothold, we've got to work together on this, or we're all going to be sort of just fragmented and fractured, and then it's just going to be dog-eat-dog kind of world, very competitive, and the student, to your point, Karl, loses out. Is that a real danger, or is that too far out there?
I don't know. I couldn't say or make a generalization on that. I know enough folks like Dan at Filament and their philosophy, Breakaway and so on. These are guys who have been in the business for a long time, making learning games. They're going to continue being in the business, making learning games. I don't think they're going to stop doing that. They may dabble and look at other things, but AI has been used in games for a long time. It's not a new thing, right? So you're going to have plenty of folks that are going to stick with it and continue, especially, I think Jim made the point earlier, some of the publishers have tried it, McGraw-Hill and Elsevier. Some publishers are going to try it. Some have given up on it, and they're going to come back to it because ultimately it's content, right? Games are not a platform. Everybody's been investing in platforms and in LMS systems and in MOOCs, and these are platforms. I don't remember ever having a teacher ask me, when can I get the next platform for my classroom? That's not, or a student. I really need a new LMS to be more effective as a student. And not that they are bad or anything. It's different. And the focus has really been on that building that infrastructure and these platforms, and that's great. But where's the content? In the meantime, now we're taking a book, scanning it in, and now it's a book on a screen. Well, see, I don't know if that's that much better. And I think folks, including publishers, educators, are realizing the content has to change. And I believe there's going to be plenty of content creators out there. Because I run into faculty all the time that are actually making games for their own classroom. They may not be sophisticated. They may just be small little gems that they use and utilize in their classroom, and they don't get out anywhere. There's going to be a tide, or the tinder will be lit by the right group of people, the right kind of partnership that's actually going to be able to take advantage of that and work with those faculty all over the world. It's not just in the US, from what we're seeing, and be able to help them take those games, share them with others, and really develop more of this content. Because think about it this way, a book is written by 1 or 3 people. A game, well, there's very few really good games that are made by 1 or 3 people. It takes a lot of people. You're giving educators a means to spread their voice. Why shouldn't a Greek professor from Greece teach ancient Greek history over here anytime he or she likes through something like a game? Use the expertise where we can and give them the means to utilize their voice and really spread education to everywhere in a fun, engaging way.
Jim, do you share Andre's sentiment around games versus AR or AI and VR?
Well, I don't think that they're necessarily mutually exclusive. And as Andre mentioned, we've been using AI for a long time in game development. I think that VR has, I know VR has tremendous potential. I also know, I'm seeing it firsthand, that there's tremendous obstacles. We're talking about a huge hardware investment that schools just aren't prepared to meet. So even though there may be great game-based products that are available in VR, the typical institution's not going to be able to put those in the classroom. So they'll be used by students non-traditionally first, kind of the flipped classroom, where they go home and then they use their high-end computer in their bedroom to be able to experience the game so that they can come to school and discuss it when they're all sitting in rows staring, at the front of the room. But I think that one of the things that Karl or Andre mentioned this some time ago back in our talk here, that's going to be critical is faculty preparation and being able to leverage the power of the game. So another thing that we see often is that games are treated like a fire and forget, like watching a video. And just like a really good book for education, the game itself isn't necessarily where the end all of the learning. It's being able to take the class and get them together in a community and make sense of the experience that they had in the game. And the faculty member needs to be prepared to do that. You can't just fire the game off, expect the students to all go play it and gain the maximum benefit from it without there being some kind of a traditional, community of learners event that happens in the classroom. And it was Karl who said this. So I think that the sooner that we can make that a broader part of teacher preparation, I think the more effective we're going to see the use of the products that are high quality that are available now.
Well, Karl, you are granted with the final word today in our panel. So what I'd like from you is just, what are you walking away with? I mean, Andre, you said, and I agree with you, that a lot of students, we don't just need talking heads. Now, I think I would never call the 3 of you talking heads, though we are all on video. So Karl, prove the audience wrong and thinking, well, wait a minute, I'm looking at 4 talking heads in this regard, right? So
2 quick things. The one thing I do disagree a little bit with Andre is that the problem with the elements of VR and AR and AI and machine learning and everything, they take the administrator's eyes off the ball. So now instead of investing in more game-based learning and making the fundamentals work right, they shiny object. And I think there's a lot of shiny object chasing in education, and a forgotten focus on the fundamentals, right? You talk to any coach, they say, hey, focus on blocking and tackling, like the rest of the game will take care of itself. And I think we've forgotten a lot of blocking and tackling, and that's why deep dives into game-based learning makes sense. In terms of what the future is, I hope people come away from this actually optimistic. I really think that we're on and at a place where the game-based learning is really going to start to get the attention. We're going to see people, we're going to see the results. We have seen the results, and we're going to continue to see the results. People are going to go, yeah, this can actually happen. And so I think when we meld kind of the teacher prep, the faculty prep, the professional development with really effective games that are being developed at DeVry and that, Triceum is doing and all those kind of things, I think we're really going to see, again, as I said, this tinder, this explosion of, wow, this really works. If you look at the Gartner hype cycle, you've got, the trough of disillusionment. So we might be in that a little bit. But after we get the slope of enlightenment, we get to the plateau of productivity where it works and it makes sense, and it's something that it's just another tool. And I think we're moving up that slope slowly, but I think once we get there, it's going to be really exciting. And all we need is, I think, one or two kind of policy wonk folks who say, look, this is a structure we need in schools. This is a structure we need to accredit it. This is a structure we need to make sure that it's distributed properly, and then that's going to work. So, I would say, Rod, to your audience, if there's anybody out there that's, wants to take up the role,
just
talk
knock
to the
on
four
screen,
of us.
Right,
Exactly. Drop us an email and we'll be excited to do that.
Well, Jim, Karl, and Andre, again, another wonderful conversation. And to your point, Karl, if we can advance this and we spark somebody to say, you know what, we need to have a larger conversation, whether that's in the publishing world or the policy world, then we have done our part. Again, continued success. Once again, I'm Dr. Rod Berger. Join us for our next cup of coffee as we continue to have conversations in education that matter to you.